Okay, before we go into Lucky Duck, I do want to ask you just a few things that we bypassed. Starting with, you were a correspondent at NBC Nightly News for a bit, and I just wanted to ask you about some of the stories that you covered.
Well, I covered the Congress for NBC Nightly News.
You also did the wedding of Charles and Diana.
Oh yes, yes. Oh boy, those were the good old days. You know, those were the days. I was lucky enough to work in television news when nobody ever asked you how much did you spend on the story. They only ask you, did you get the story, and did you get it right, and did you get it fast and first. And we used to, for example, there were, I believe, about 90 people full-time in the London Bureau of NBC, and yet we sent over another 90 for the royal wedding of Diane and Charles, just to make sure that we were fully covered on this story. I was one of the people that went over. I had a great time. I mean, my goodness, let's face it, you know, when you come right down to it, being a journalist, it's like being paid to have a front row seat on history. And it's also like being paid to go to school and learn things. That story, I spent the night on the Mall, with all the people out there. And then, you know, we watched the wedding. There was a lot of silliness that went on. And I don't know that it was all terribly serious. And as it turns out, you know, the wedding didn't last either. Or the wedding lasted, the marriage didn't. But we spent gobs of money on it. Television loves a costume story. And I know not too long ago I heard on TV that Prince William, I think, is perhaps about to announce his upcoming nuptials. And I thought, oh, here we go again. And it's kind of made me feel old to think, my goodness, I covered your parents' wedding. Maybe he'll do better at it.
And then if you jump forward, talk about covering Princess Diana's death. Would that have been for Nick News?
No, we didn't. I don't think I really ever covered Princess Diana's death. Did I? No. Let's see. She died in what, 98. And I was doing Nick News then. No, we did not cover Princess Diana's death. We do not feel compelled at Nick News to cover everything that the other networks cover. And something like that, a story like that's fairly straightforward. There's nothing much to say to kids about that they don't already know. It's not as if they're getting conflicting information. That's when we really step in. When a story gets so big that there's so much information out there that we know kids are getting misinformation because they're getting it from so many sources, and there's nothing scarier than schoolyard rumor. So we'll step in and try to sort things out, whether it's the first Iraq War or the second, you know, or 9/11 or the Oklahoma City bombing, or any of these horrible stories like that. That's what part of our mission is, to step in and say, let's listen, let's talk about this, let's give kids a place that they can express their feelings and their thoughts, particularly their thoughts on this subject, and let's try to correct what misinformation we can.
So talk about Nick News. How did it start?
Nick News started by accident. Lucky Duck had gotten going by this time, and we had produced a couple of documentaries for PBS and one for TBS and a couple of other things, and then Gulf War I started. And Geraldine Laybourne, one of the founders of Nickelodeon, called me, and she said, this is the first time this country's been at war since we've had 24-hour news. And she said, I don't think kids can escape it. And I think they're getting a lot of misinformation. We have no news on Nickelodeon, but I know that you have a production company, and I like your work. And would you put together a show that tries to explain this war to kids, and more to the point, lowers the anxiety of American kids? And I said, well, I don't know, let me think about it. And that night I was channel surfing, and I came across, with all due respect to my former colleague and a man I admire greatly, Peter Jennings. And he was doing a show for kids on this subject. And there was Peter, and he had on a suit, coat and tie, and he was standing up in the middle of the room, and the kids were sitting down on the floor below him, way beneath him. And Peter had a gas mask in his hands. And he said, "Timmy, this is a gas mask. Would you like me to show you how to put this on?" And I called Jerry Laybourne and I said, "I think we'll give it a go." Because two things were wrong there. One, you're not going to calm Timmy's fears by showing him how to put on a gas mask. And two, why are you way up there and they're down there? So we opened our show, and we're sitting on the floor, sitting on a sofa, sort of all crowded around on this. And I had a beach ball that was a globe of the world. And I started up by saying, "This is Baghdad." And I asked one of the kids to spin it till we found the U.S. And I said, "This is, the U.S. Now here's the deal. Saddam Hussein does not have a bomb that can reach from there to here. And he doesn't have an airplane that can reach from there to here without stopping to refuel. And every country in between has said that they will not allow his planes to stop to refuel. Therefore, you can go to sleep tonight knowing you're safe. Now, let's talk about this war and what's going on." And that was the beginning of Nick News.
How did you come to that? I mean, how did you...
Common sense.
Had you worked with kids
No.
before? Or is this
No, and I had kids. I had kids. One of the things that I knew, and one of the things that with Nick News that we've always worked so hard on is media literacy. I knew that my own kids were lucky for having, well, lucky in one sense, unlucky in many sense for having grown up with a journalist, but lucky in one sense, in that because they, in watching TV with me, I would say, "Well, that's an edit. Do you know what an edit is? It means something has been left out." Now, there can be good reasons for it, but it does mean that. That's what it means. Or, let's talk about this commercial. Are they selling toothpaste or are they selling popularity? Are they saying you won't be as good as so-and-so if you don't use their product? Let's look at the camera. People tell you the camera doesn't lie. Is that true? Now, you've been on stories with me. Nothing lies as easy as a camera. If I pointed at one thing, I've just pointed it away from another thing. I can make a demonstration of 20 people look like 200 without much trouble at all with a camera. I said, now let's talk about this. Let's talk about sitcoms. Now, in the real world, in workplaces, work goes on. But in most sitcoms, you don't have to see them actually work. You see them standing around, talk about their work. And, let's talk about other things. In the real world, family houses don't clean themselves. Somebody has to clean them. But in sitcom families, you don't see anybody doing the cleaning. Also in the real world, usually problems don't get solved in 28 minutes. But they do on television. So that's called being media literate. And unless kids are media literate, the more they know, the less of a tool of television they'll be. Or whether it's the internet or television. You just simply have to be smarter than your TV. And that's what we keep telling kids, is you're smarter than your TV. Well, I didn't realize that I knew all of this stuff simply for having told my own kids when I was raising them, all this stuff, until I didn't even know it had a name called media literacy until we started doing Nick News. But Nick News has been based on common sense. Now, over the years, we have had the benefit of a great many teachers. I like that word better than educators. Teachers and authors and experts help us. But the biggest experts on our show have always been the kids, because they are on the front line of whatever it is in their lives that is of concern to them. So that is why Nick News is a show for kids, not about kids. And there's a big difference. Yes, in a sense it's about kids, but it's aimed at kids. It's not a show for parents. This is not a show for you about your kid. Although we also know that many families like to watch our shows together, and we think that's good because then they can start a conversation about their own attitudes in that family. We're not trying to tell you what to think. We just want kids to think. In fact, when I first started the show, we had a big sign painted for the set, and it said, "Question authority." I'm from the 60s. What can I tell you? And then we discovered that kids today thought that meant if you're lost, ask a cop how to get home. Well, indeed, that is a good idea if you're lost. I cannot argue that, but that was not what I had in mind. So we decided question authority was too narrow, and we made the sign read question everything. We thought that was a little better because we wanted kids to know that you have a right to questions and that there might be more than one right answer to a question, and that questions can be just as important as the answers. I mean, we don't have a lot of rules at Nick News, but those are some of the basic ones. That and the fact that, and this is one of the few ways that it differs from grown-up newscasts. I always get asked, how do you write differently for kids? The truth is, in most cases, I don't. I trust their intelligence. If I'm going to use a word I think a 10-year-old might not know, I either use it in a sentence in such a clear way that the meaning is obvious, or I stop and explain what the word is. Just explain what it means and go on. But I don't not use the word. I don't dumb it down. So I don't have to. There are two things that are different about doing Nick News than doing news for grown-ups. And one is, with Nick News, wherever we show in the world something bad that's going on, okay, the Oklahoma City bombing. Let me take that one for an example. We never show anything like that without showing people trying to make it better. Now, nightly news doesn't do that, but I can still remember my clothes. What I said at the end of the Oklahoma City show is, because so many of the images of that show you will recall were of children who were killed or desperately wounded, being carried out of that building, looking like little bloody dolls. So we had a lot that we had to get past with kids on that one. And I said, when you think of this, don't let your memories be of that crushed building or that. I said, let your memories be of the hundreds of people who were brave enough to rush into that building to save people, and of the thousands of people who rushed to Oklahoma City with medical aid and care, and of the hundreds of thousands who sent food and toys, and of the millions who prayed and cared and worried and felt for you. Wherever bad things happen, there are always good things, good people trying to make it better, and it's always your choice of what kind of person you're going to be. And there are always more good people than there are bad. Please remember that. Well, I wouldn't be saying that on the evening news. And the other thing, this is the only drawback to writing for kids. It's the only drawback to writing Nick News. And the only way that my writing is truly different, and that's this. Irony is just lost on 10-year-olds. It is. What can I tell you? So, in some ways, the way that I would write for Overnight, or some of the other shows, Our World, that I did, that kind of goes away. Irony doesn't work. Kids are not ironic at 10. Darn it.
Well, do you have an outlet for that otherwise? How do you...
Over the years, I've written syndicated newspaper columns, and op-ed pieces, and 3 books and books. But I had to have some outlet for it because that's too much of the way I write. So yeah, I find ways to get around that. I have really squeaked around in this chair, and your cameraman told me not to do that. I'm so sorry.
Well, talking a little bit about starting Nick News. Did you have experts or consultants?
No, we didn't. No, we started with our common sense and the fact that we were journalists, and that we knew what good journalism was, and we started with the rules that we weren't going to lie to kids. And we weren't going to make up, say, there, nothing bad happened, don't you worry about it, honey, because I would go back to that time when I was 10 years old and terrified of the Soviet Union dropping the hydrogen bomb on me, and the fact that nobody addressed my fears or gave me a way to talk about it. And I would think about, I wasn't a fool at age 10. I could see on television, I could see these bombs being tested. I knew this stuff. Why was I being treated as if ignorance was bliss? Ignorance is not bliss. If you know, there are people today who think Nick News should never be on the air because they say, why can't we just let children have their childhoods in blissful ignorance? Well, you know what? It would be a fine world if we could, but we can't. Certainly not with the computers today. Kids are hooked in, they're hooked up, they know. They know. So if you pretend it doesn't exist, you know what? I think it's a lie to think that was ever that way, because if you go back, okay, I grew up in the Cold War, and I was terrified of the hydrogen bomb, the atom bomb. Well, certainly kids during World War II knew what was going on. Certainly kids during the Great Depression knew what was going on. World War I before that, and before that, most kids, unless you were wealthy, went to work at about age 12. So I don't want to hear about the blissful ignorance of childhood. It would be really nice. And yes, I do believe there is a cutoff point. I mean, I don't think you sit down with a 3-year-old. You know, sit down with a 3-year-old and you say, there, nothing bad's ever going to happen to you. Got you covered. This is never going to happen to you. That's not the answer you give a 10-year-old when a 10-year-old asks you a question. Because that 10-year-old will just look at you and go, you're lying to me. I know better. So then you try to give them an answer that makes sense to them. You know, and that can come in with its own problems. For example, when President Clinton was impeached, and you know, we knew we had to do a show about that, and I thought, how are we going to deal with the sex aspect of this show? How are we going to deal with this? And I thought, okay, the word inappropriate in our culture with kids today has come to mean, we say to young kids, you have a right not to be touched in an inappropriate place. You have a right not to be touched in an inappropriate way. It's become almost code. So we were able to go on the air and say the president had an inappropriate relationship with a woman to whom he was not married, and when questioned about it in court, lied under oath. Is it ever okay for a president to lie? And that was how the discussion started. Well, of course, it is okay sometimes for a president to lie. You know, I go back to those Canadians that were hidden in the Canadian embassy in Tehran. Well, not only did the president know about that, we all knew about it. Every major news organization in the world knew those 7 Canadians, knew those 7 Americans were hiding in the Canadian embassy. We all lied about it to protect their lives. That's okay. There are times like that. There are fewer than presidents would have you think, fewer times that it's okay to lie, but there are some times. So then we get to, is it okay to lie in your house? What happens if you lie? What do you think ought to happen to the president? Blah, blah, blah. We were off the sex and on to the issues fairly rapidly. There's not a subject we wouldn't cover. There are subjects we haven't covered for one reason or another, usually because they have not become abortion, for example. If that became the biggest issue in a presidential campaign, we'd cover it. Just haven't covered it yet. Haven't had a reason to. But so we said we wouldn't lie to kids. We said that we would always try to point out that there were more good people in the world than bad. And that we would always respect their intelligence, that we would not talk down to them. And I think if there's one thing that Nick News is most known for, it's for respecting the intelligence of young people. And that makes me kind of happy. In a way, that goes back to overnight.
Let's talk a little about the age range of the kids that you're doing.
Well, it can be, you know, our core audience is 9 to 11. You know, but it goes down to 6, it goes up to 14, because kids mature at different ages. But you get crazy things. I got a phone call, an email from a man. Oh, he was angry at me. He was so angry at me. He said, I went into our den at 9 o'clock last night, and there was my 5-year-old sitting on the couch with the remote and your show, and there were those images of those planes flying into those buildings. How dare you? I'm never going to let my kid watch Nickelodeon again, blah, 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 blah. Well, now, there's several things wrong with that sentence. One is in all those times that we refer to that, we have never once shown an image of those planes flying into those buildings. Not one time on Nick News, ever. Number 2, what's your kid doing up alone and in control of the remote at age 5 with the television and you're not in the room? Our show isn't meant for a 5-year-old. That's why we put disclaimers at the top of it. And that's why it's on at 9 o'clock or 8:30. So, don't be telling me what I can't produce. You take charge of your kid out there. I do believe the First Amendment stops at your front door. I believe that you have a right to tell your kid they can or cannot watch anything you say. But don't tell me what I can and cannot produce. If you don't want to watch it, don't watch it. That's why God gave you that remote.
How has it been working with Nickelodeon?
That's been great. It's been the best partnership ever. They knew so much about kids. When we first started, and I was very candid with Jerry Labor, and I said, I don't know anything about kids other than, raising them. And she said, that makes us even. We don't know anything about news. And she said, together we'll learn. And she said, we know about kids. And so they've been fabulous, in teaching us, getting us started in how to work with kids, and some of the precepts of Nickelodeon that we took over instantly because we believed in them. And they've been great. They have never once said, well, only one time, and I can't tell you the story, have they ever said no to a show. And I have held their hands and taken them down some paths that were kind of worrisome for them. The show that we did on kids whose parents are gay was worrisome for them only because the right wing set up websites that all you had to do was push a button to generate an email to Nickelodeon saying, we're never going to buy any product ever seen on your network again, and we're going to tell everybody you know that you're bad people. And it got a lot of press, and the day it aired, we were the ticker tape lead on the ticker tape in Times Square, our little cable show. And it was Nick to proceed with show despite protest. Well, those kind of protests, all the people protesting were, one, all pretty much coming from 2 websites, and 2, not a one of them had seen the show. Not a one of them had seen the show, which was about respect for kids. We did this show when I discovered that the word fag was the most common hate word on elementary school playgrounds. And I thought, no, man, that's so wrong. And our show was about respecting the kids who come from families who may be different from yours. And that's all it's about. And we had gone to Jerry Falwell, the Reverend Falwell, to be interviewed on the show, and he had been on Nick News several times. And I told him what the show, and he said, well, you're absolutely right. He said, you know my feelings on homosexuality. He said, but no kid ought to be distant for some choice of their parents. That's just wrong. And he said it on camera. And he's in the well, as the drumbeat about stop this show from going on Nickelodeon, Falwell sees his congregation going one way while he's gone the other. And all of a sudden he starts appearing in the Washington Post in quotes saying, I don't think Nickelodeon should air this show. Well, I could see why. He didn't want it aired since he was on it saying something entirely different. And the day the show aired, CNN asked the Reverend Falwell and me to come on Wolf Blitzer's show, which came on right before our show, different network, but came on right before. And I went on knowing that I was not going to let the Reverend Falwell engage me on his terms. And every time he said something, I said, well, as you said in our show, because I had the transcript, as you said in our show, kids should not be hurt for the actions of their parents. You said that. Well, yes, but I was just. And it sort of came to the end of and Wolf said, Jerry had gone on at great length, the Reverend Falwell had, and he turned, he said, well, we only have 15 seconds left, Linda. Do you have any final words? And I said, yeah. If we can't all be friends, can't we at least be better strangers to one another? Boom, we're off the air, and then our show started. And all that was accomplished was we had the highest ratings of any show we'd ever done till that point. So I never mind stirring the stew a little. And Nickelodeon has come to understand there's nothing wrong with stirring the stew. And that sometimes the stew needs stirring.
You mentioned, I know you don't want to talk about it, that there was one show that
Yeah.
didn't get on. Can you give
I
us
can't talk about it. I just can't. It was one person. That person's not. I just get who said no, and I said okay. If it's there was no room for discussion on it.
Had the show already been in the can?
No. We had not even shot it yet. So at least that wasn't out the money. But other than that, there's been nothing, and I think today, if that were to come up again, that the answer would be different. But other than that, I can safely say that with that one exception, Nickelodeon has never, ever said to us, no, you can't take on this topic, you can't do this. And what a blessing that's been. I mean, they have been, they've been not just partners, they've been our supporters. They've in every way that a network can be, and in far more ways than many news networks have been. They have a feeling that the audience deserves the very best, and that we have an obligation to get it right. That's kind of wonderful.
Do they have, they have their own branding and style. Do you have other things that you have to do within the branding, the colors, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, it's always orange. Because Nickelodeon is orange. Everybody knows that Nickelodeon is orange. So, yeah, within the graphics. But that's only within the graphic openings. And so what? What do I care what color it says in It's the News? And I think Nickelodeon, I wear Nickelodeon orange sneakers when I'm on the air. I like orange Converse sneakers. My grandson's favorite color is orange. It makes me very popular with him.
Talk a bit about assembling the team as the show.
Well, it starts out with my partner and me, Rolf Tessum, and then Mark Lyons, who has been producing the show almost since the very beginning. His kids were little girls now, and one is working in television, has graduated college, is working in television in L.A. The other's halfway through college. And we had from the beginning, we had an idea too, this was me, was that I wanted a combination of older people in the business and very young people in the business. That I felt that both groups had a lot to learn from one another, and I also knew that was all we could afford, was people just starting out and people toward the end of their runs. Particularly because at that time when we started, the networks were laying off so many people. And they were laying off so many good people who were in their 50s, and some even in their 60s. And then you have the 22-year-olds that are just starting out. So I thought, well, why don't we combine these? Because they can learn from one another. And that has been a great idea. That and the fact that we always have a lot of interns. We have full-time employees here who started out as interns years ago, and then moved on to full-time employees. And we have when Rolf and I started the company, we had worked at all three networks, and we knew what large corporations were like, and we didn't have many rules for Lucky Duck Productions, but we had a few. And the first was that we wouldn't produce television that we weren't proud to put our name to. And the second was we had the no asshole rule. You couldn't be an asshole and work here. You just couldn't. And if you slipped by the process and we discovered later that you were one, you would have to leave. And I fired a first-rate video editor once because he made an intern cry. Nobody's paid enough in this business to have some jerk yell at you and make you cry. Certainly interns aren't paid enough. So there's probably a reason we have a line of people wanting to work at Lucky Duck. I just don't feel... I feel the work we do is extremely important. I'm not big on taking yourself seriously about it. You take the work seriously, not yourself. I don't much care whether people wear coats and ties. I mean, my God, look at me. I'm sitting here talking to you barefoot. The camera can't see that, but the cameraman knows. You know. Cameraman knows. I don't feel that what we do is the Sermon on the Mount. You know, what we do is important, but we are not the sole keepers of truth here. And I particularly feel strong that you spread the credit around. Because, I mean, my God, if you look at the awards, which are behind the camera, and need to stay that way for now, we couldn't have done that without. I mean, I don't get those awards. I'm the one that gets to stand up and accept them. There's a big difference. I stand on the shoulders of a whole bunch of good people here at Lucky Duck. It's nice to work at a company that it's nice to work at. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talk a little about the show, Nick News itself,
Yeah.
your mainstay, the format of that show.
Well, it's Nick News. It's basically a news and documentary series that tries to explain the news to kids. And within that, it can be a news event that has just happened. I mean, right now we're working on a Gulf oil spill show that we're putting together, and we're planning on doing Haiti for Christmas. Do they know it's Christmas in Haiti? I mean, my goodness, it's a year after. So those are news event shows. We have also just completed a show on issues that affect kids, a show on what is the state of foster care today. What is foster care like? What is it like to be in foster care? That is a much stronger show than you would imagine, because the number one fear of all kids is to be abandoned by their parents. And then we do shows that we do 1 or 2 shows a year that are just for fun. We just finished a show. We just finished a show that was kind of for fun and kind of not for fun, and not everybody in the world is doing it. Unplugged. We took all the electronics away from some kids for a week. I mean everything. Phones, televisions, no texting, no computers, nothing. And stayed with them, for a week just to watch their lives. And once in a while we'll do shows that are just fun, like the highest rated show that we've ever done was not a serious show. Okay? That's okay. That's fine. It's Nickelodeon. And that was 10 things, it was a countdown show, 10 things I hate about school. We did one show this year called the 10 most annoying things that parents say and do. And that was kind of fun, because this kid's talking about, my dad tries to be cool. He says, hey, down dog, I'm down dog. I said, please don't say that. Please don't do that. Or my mother starts dancing. Don't dance. And, we had Tina Fey came on the show, and a whole bunch of other famous people who came on and talked about when they were kids, things that embarrassed them that parents did. But mostly our stuff is really straight ahead stuff that kids either need to hear about or need a place to talk about. Some of our shows are done almost in a sense of being, this sounds pretentious, like group therapy, for example. Let's take 9/11, okay? And we didn't have to say what happened. We knew what happened. But what kids needed, and our show went on 4 days after the event, what we gave kids was a place where they could sit on our set and talk about their fears and their feelings. And there was a Muslim girl on the set as well, and kids that were from New York who'd seen it, and then kids from other parts of the country who'd just watched it on TV. And in the course of talking about what their fears were and what their anger was and their various feelings, what they're saying, in effect, if you're watching it and you're a kid out there watching it, what you're hearing is, it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to be angry. It's okay for me to have these fears. So in that sense, it becomes a kind of a group therapy.
Where were you on 9/11?
I was driving into New York City from out of town. I was, I got to the island just as they shut the bridge. And I did not get in until the next day. And I took press passes and, a few untruths to get down to Lucky Duck here. They were untruths in service of a good cause, okay. All right. I had a cast, from a skiing accident, one of those that straps on, and they weren't letting any cars or letting anybody below 14th Street unless you could prove you lived down here. And, I've been on television a long time. Most of the cops know me, but they weren't going to let us down here anyway. And I pointed to my broken leg. I've got a broken leg. And they let us come down. So I was going to say it was only a mild But all of the young people who worked here and who were here that morning, and, you know, we're just about a mile away. I mean, look out the window and see where they were. All of these young people, when it happened, went into our equipment room and grabbed cameras and turned and started heading that way, not that way. And I was so proud of every one of them because they're journalists. And they did me proud as journalists.
Learn from the best.
I don't know if they learn from the best, but they sure know what to do.
What kind of feedback do you get from your shows?
Well, we've been fortunate in that PTA groups and the National Education Association and Boys and Girls Clubs and Parents' Choice all love us. And we've been fortunate enough to win a certain number of awards from an organization that shall go unnamed here over the years, that we've won a number of those for Outstanding Children's Program of the Year. Can't say Emmy on this thing, you understand. And you know, a lot of other DuPonts and Peabodys. But I think the reactions I like best are always the letters I get from kids, for the most part, or the letters I get from kids who are grown, or when grown kids stop me on the street and tell me they grew up not watching Nick News, or that they went into journalism because of Nick News, or I always have mixed feelings at those who say, I went into politics because I learned about politics on Nick News. I thought maybe I did something wrong. But I know what they mean is they mean our campaigns where we let kids vote for president every 4 years, and where kids interview, we actually go around the country and get the questions that kids would ask if they could, and we take them to the candidates, and we've been doing it long enough now. The candidates sit down and we roll the tapes, and they seriously take those kids' questions and they answer them, and we put them up there, and then Nickelodeon opens up the lines. It's now online. When we started, it was telephone lines for kids to vote. We're going to be on the air 20 years come next year. It was just astounding to me for a number of reasons. One, it's a good show, and so often in television good things don't last. And two, I don't think you'd find anyone in television who ever knew me, who ever thought I would have a show last 20 years without me getting it canceled. Who knows?
Well, you mentioned online. Has the internet changed the way you do things?
Not really. It's changed. It's broadened our scope, and we do more now, more interactive things, you know, with kids. For example, the show that we did about Unplugged. What we did was we went online and we asked kids to nominate someone they knew, a friend, who needed to be unplugged, and that was how we identified the kids that we wanted that we unplugged. So we use it a good deal more in that sense, and our shows are also streamed online in case they miss them, you know, on the air. So I said not really, but that's not really true, is it? We do use the internet a lot more. And of course, it goes without saying that every kid watching Nick News knows more about it than I do. That's just a given.
Well, how do you think that's going to play out in the future?
I have no idea. And if there is one thing I have learned as a journalist in all these years, is that as a prophet, I make an okay journalist. I have no idea how it's going to play out, and I won't even be around to cover it. So
what are your current projects?
Well, we're working on Nick News. We're working on a couple of projects for networks that I can't say anything because it's not because there's anything wrong with it. It's just a condition of when we're signed on. It's usual that we can't speak of the project till the project is finished. We just had a documentary on HBO air. We've done a number of documentaries for HBO over the years, and we just had a wonderful documentary about Studs Terkel air on HBO. And we're working on, I should let you talk to our director of development about all of this. We've got a lot of ideas for projects that we want to do. I mean, right now, the problem with an independent production company is that we have to find a network that wants the show before we can do it. We do not deficit finance here at Lucky Duck Productions. So right now, I am looking for a network to produce a show that I find to be interesting and ironic. And that is the fact that there are thousands of people from the United States of America moving to Mexico every month. And about fewer than a third of them are working, about a third of them are working legally. Do you not find that ironic? I do. I just have to find the right network that wants it. I will.
Do you like that part of it, the business part of it?
No, I don't. I've gotten better at it as the years go on, but no, I don't like it. My favorite place in the whole world is the edit room. Still. Sitting there and moving pictures around and sort of exchanging the words. Say, let's try this. Let's do this. I have more fun there than any place. But then I'm also in the room with fabulously talented people. Holden Kepix, who has been our chief editor of Nick News since the beginning of Nick News. To sit in the edit room with Holden and Wendy, one of our producers, or Marty or Josh, and to sit with one of them on one of their shows. I don't have a lot to do. I go in as the executive producer, and I have the right to say I want this changed or that changed, but more often than not, there's nothing that needs changing. It's just me wanting to play and say, well, let's try it this way a little bit, or maybe let's try it this way. And they're kind enough to humor me.
How important is it for you to keep working?
Probably at least until I win the lottery. I'm the original grasshopper. I never invested in the market or had a long-term pension plan until recently. And besides, I like what I'm doing. And when you like what you're doing, it doesn't feel quite so much like work. So I don't have any plans to quit right now. I'm on the other hand, you're not gonna, I'm not Don Hewitt. You're not, or Mike Wallace. You're not going to find me here after my age has hit any number starting with a 9. I will not be doing this. There are other things in life I would enjoy doing too. I still want to write more books. I'm trying to write, I hate to say adult fiction. I've written 3 adult nonfiction books and 8 children's fiction. So when I say I'm trying to write adult fiction, I simply mean as opposed to children's fiction. But somehow when you say you're writing adult fiction, it sounds like you're writing porn. I'm writing adult fiction. I'm trying to write a murder mystery. I'm not sure why I thought the love of reading would translate into the ability to write one, but I'm giving it a go. Who knows? Who knows? I've written 3 memoirs. Lord, there might be another one. One thing I've never written about, and I keep thinking that I want to write about kids and television. I want to write a book about kids and television, about making television for kids, about how kids watch television, about what kids have taught me over these 20 years.
What's the most
about television.
What's the most important thing that they've taught you?
Not to take myself seriously would be the most important thing kids have taught me. Absolutely. But then the whole world has taught me that for years and years and years. My very favorite fan letter ever came from a kid. And it was, Dear Miss Ellerbee, when I grow up, I want to do just what you do. Would you please do it better? And so it goes.
That was my next question, is where did that come from?
I stole it from Lloyd Dobbins. His parents used to say it to him when he was a child, and something on the news would happen that he couldn't explain, that they couldn't explain to him. They couldn't give him a good reason for. Why did this happen? Why would somebody do this? And they would just say, and so it goes. That's how people are. That's what happens, and so it goes. So when he was anchoring Weekend, he ended every broadcast with an essay, and he would end it by saying, and so it goes. When I joined Weekend, we alternated ending the broadcast. So whoever ended the broadcast said, and so it goes. Same thing on NBC News Overnight. Lloyd left NBC News Overnight, went on to do another show, and the phrase stayed with me. So I stole it. There's no question about it. I stole it. I do not use it on Nick News. I never have, because I always thought that it was just a little too cynical. It wasn't the last thought I wanted to leave with kids. For years, I ended Nick News by saying, if you want to know, ask. Now I just let the show end itself. you know, doesn't require that I sum up anything, but you know, if I'm making a speech, or I'm writing for grown-ups, or if I'm just feeling nostalgic about 40 years of television, well, then the only phrase I can think of is, "And so it goes."
The other I guess catchphrase would be "lucky duck."
Well, there is an actual duck, and it was years and years ago in the early '80s, or late '70s even, I forget. And I was in Los Angeles on a story for NBC News, and I had a health problem, and they thought it might be cancer, and it turned out it wasn't. It was something very, very simple to fix. And the day I walked out of the hospital feeling great, because I did not have cancer yet. I got it later, but that's different. And as I walked by the hospital gift shop, I'd been in the hospital like 2.5 days, there was a little yellow stuffed duck, and it appeared to be smiling right at me. Now, that could have been the drugs. I don't know. You know, I had been in the hospital. I was feeling really good. But I bought it. And I used to, when I would substitute anchor on NBC, and then later when I would anchor, I would rub its head for luck before I went on the air. Stick it under the desk. The first night that Overnight was going to go on the air, Herb Dudnick, the producer, came running out of the control room, and he said, "Where's that duck?" I said, "Well, it's under the desk." And he pulled it out, and he rubbed its head, and he put it right in the middle of the anchor desk. And he started running back to the control room, and we were 30 seconds from air. And I said, "Herb, the camera will see the duck." And he turned around, he said, "This show needs all the luck it can get." So when I started the company, I thought, okay, what am I going to call it? Well, MGM is taken. How about Lucky Duck Productions? This company needs all the luck it can get.
Does the duck still exist?
The duck is still on every show in the background somewhere, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Talk a little about women in television, how that's changed over the
Well, that's changed considerably. For number one, of the 3 broadcast networks now, 2 of them are being anchored by women. I would call that a big damn change, certainly from when I started. When I started, and as I said, we were led into the business because of the pressure of the civil rights movement and the women's movement, not because anyone at the networks or the stations wanted us. They really felt that putting the broads in broadcasting would ruin the party, and they may be right. Maybe it did. And in the beginning, all they wanted us to do was cover, you know, go cover the story at the nursing home, but there's a fashion show down here. How about the story about the little dog down the street that saves the little cat? No, I'm here to cover politics. Oh, well, you're not a man. You know, I mean, it was rough. It really was. And there was a lot of literal patting us on our heads. You know, there, honey, sweetheart. I never had, and I can say this honestly, I never had an employer, you know, imply in any way that sexual favors would get me anywhere, but that may have just been because nobody wanted my sexual favors, nor would they have had them. But I mean, what I'm trying to say is I don't think that existed much. But there was a lot of paternalism that went on. And that can be just as damaging as harassment. And there was a lot of harassment in the verbal sense, that went on. We really were just supposed to be these cute little things. And there was a total double standard in looks at the time. I mean, honey, I worked for a lot of men, and some of them had something to say about my work. All of them had something to say about my hair, which is very different from what it used to look like. And I know, all the women I know will tell you the same stories on this. That people would write in about your hair, or that your bosses would talk to you about your hair, or what you had on, or how you dressed, or, I mean, when I went to work covering the Congress for NBC News, okay, I wore a blazer and a shirt and blue jeans and sneakers. Now, why did I do it? I did it because there was a lot of running around the Capitol and all of those office buildings to chase these congressmen down. And sneakers made a whole lot more sense than high heels. And because I like to wear blue jeans, I'm comfortable in them. Anything else is costume. Why was I able to do it? I was able to do it because there was a code of conduct in the United States Congress that said the men had to wear coats and ties to cover the Congress. Since no one had ever anticipated that women would be covering the Congress, there was no dress code for women.
Did that ever change?
I don't know. But I loved the fact that we were able to just turn it around and use it against. Because guys would complain, how come Ellerbee gets to wear jeans and sneakers and we have to wear coats and ties? And mind you, I had on a blazer and a silk shirt from the waist up, which is all you ever saw. You know, how come Ellerbee? I said, hey, check the code. You guys wrote the code. We didn't. It's so much better now. And cable, I think, had a lot to do with that, with it coming back to the broadcast networks that way. Because in cable, you suddenly began to see women running things, women presidents of cable networks, women vice presidents, women executive producers of programs. And so as it worked back, then you got to see women, more women in positions of real power led to more women in positions of perceived and real power, which I think anchoring is perception and real. I think it's great that Diane and Katie are anchoring the news. I get a giggle every time I watch it. They both have earned it. They're both good at what they do. They are both journalists, and neither one of them slept her way there or got there for any reason other than the right ones.
What do you think is the power of television?
Too damn much. Television. I go backwards and forward. I go back and forth between thinking television is so powerful that it ought to be taken out in the alley and shot, and thinking television has roughly the power of a hula hoop. But the truth is, it is far too powerful. And yet, the minute I say that, I'm well aware that the internet is even more powerful. And for all of the things that we were frightened that television might do, whatever the internet might do could be 10 times more frightening or enlightening. And the only answer for any of us is to become media literate, because one thing that has become clear today is that whatever map you draw of whatever truths you're going to take from the internet or from television, whatever map you use, you're going to be your own navigator.
What advice would you give to a professional starting out today in news?
The only advice I'd give to a professional starting out today in news is the same one I would have given 40 years ago. Respect your viewer, reader, listener, whatever's at the other end of the piece of machinery that you're on. Respect them. They are as smart as you. They deserve your very best. Don't take yourself seriously. Take the work seriously. And learn an alternative trade just in case you need one.
What do you think has been the highlight of your career?
I go back and forth between Nick News and Overnight, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Nick News.
Any regrets in your career?
Oh, many. Too many to name. Yeah, all of them self-inflicted. Yes.
And how would you like to be remembered?
How would I like to be remembered? As that slightly irreverent woman who didn't look like most of the reporters and may not have acted like most of the reporters, but had a great love for the truth and for telling a good story.
Oh, thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.